Well, hello, Manchester Hooks at Auburn, and we hope in the not-too-distant future to be able to greet folks in Goffstown and Bedford as well through a sharing program for this program. And here we are. It's the Progress Report, as you come to expect every Wednesday at 7 p.m., which is today. This is the last Wednesday in the month of August, gangs. The weekend is a holiday weekend. I hope you got some nice plans, but it's a long holiday weekend, and the Labor Day picnic will be occurring at let's see, where is it? It's at St. George's. And the guest speaker is none other than Bernie Sanders, who we all saw last night, or I think it was last night, wasn't it, down in Florida?
Tuesday night.
Congratulating the surprise upset winner of the Democratic primary in the Florida gubernatorial race, a man named Andrew Gillum, who happens to be an African American. He's going to be the Democratic nominee in Florida, and there's a black woman who's going to be the Democratic nominee in the adjoining state of Georgia. These are going to be really interesting races to watch in the era of Trump and dog whistles in favor of national white supremacy. So we will see what happens, and we'll probably want to talk about that. I did want to say right off at the top that we are expecting and hoping that Donna Soucy, who's just recently been named the minority leader of the New Hampshire State Senate, which is a very impressive thing for her to achieve. She almost was the duly elected minority leader, but lost to Senator Jeff Woodburn, who stepped down due to some allegations of domestic abuse you probably read about. And the caucus then nominated and approved Donna Soucy to be the ranking minority member in the state Senate, at least until the election, and then a new caucus may form, and who knows, there may be a chance for her to be the majority leader at that time, we would hope. So that's what we got. And as always, we hope you'll participate, particularly since for the first several minutes of the show, maybe even half the show, we'll still be awaiting Donna Soucy, but we'd love to have anybody call in and participate. But we're not without our own resources here on the most dangerous hour on TV, because I have my good friend Mike Farley sitting here. And even though it's hot, he put his jacket back on.
I don't know how long I'm going to hold out, Bob, but man, it's pretty warm in here under the lights.
Anyway, Mike has a great feature that we are enjoying much on this program, and I hope you out there are too, called the POTUS Report on the Progress Report. He's going to deliver that, and then I've got my own. I warned him I got my own POTUS report. We got a double-barreled, and then I thought it might be fun if anybody wants to weigh in and tell us which one do you think had the better POTUS report and the Progress report.
So it's
Let us hear from you. It's a competition, a friendly competition between Mike and I, who's got the most interesting, telling POTUS report and the Progress report. Ooh. But you got the short straw. You get to go first.
That's fine. That's fine. Before I get started, though, I want to remind folks something that we want to start reminding folks of. If you cannot get to your TV to watch the Progress Report live on Wednesdays at 7, you can live stream it on any device by going to manchestertv.org, manchestertv.org, and if you click on the Channel 23 icon, the screen comes up and you catch a live feed of the show. So anywhere, coast to coast, no matter where you are, if you're on vacation, you can still catch the show and call in. But now let me swing into my this week's edition of the POTUS Report and the Progress Report. I wanted to talk a little bit about the president complaining about Google. Now, you know, I've had my questions about these social platforms. I'm still trying to work out whether their benefit outweighs some of the risks that we've been seeing lately with vulnerabilities within these platforms. But the president's argument is a little bit different. He's arguing with the search algorithm that Google uses, and he's complaining that when you look up Trump news, you don't see any good news. It's all bad news. And that Google is suppressing the good news, and he wants this to be investigated. So I got to thinking about this. Actually, someone got me thinking about this. And my wife comes from Cleveland. So I Googled Cleveland Browns news. And the president's right. It's all bad news. It's 0-16 last year. And the year before that, 1-15. You know, where's the story about them winning the Super Bowl in 2016? That story is being suppressed. So I think the president's right, and we really need to do something because we're getting all this bad news. And that's my POTUS report, and I'll put that up against yours, Bob.
Oh, gosh, I think I'm ready to surrender already. But I wanted to ask you, Mike, there's been a lot of issues about Google, because Google is the predominant search engine around the world, except, I guess, in China, where it's sort of limited. But aren't the results of the church the result of decisions that viewers make as to what's going to be responsive to that? I mean, there isn't some little gnome or bot in Google who decides what's going to be up. Isn't it based on?
From what I understand, it's the
viewer demand?
algorithm.
It's the algorithm.
And it takes input from. All I know is if I look up, a potato peeler. Every time I open my email for the next 3 months, potato peelers come up.
Yeah.
So somehow they figure it out.
Isn't that
so it does have to do with the input, the number of people looking for things. I don't know what the algorithm is. It's obviously a top secret corporate secret. That's it's the secret of their success.
Yeah.
And the idea is they want to give people what they want to see. That's the whole point of this thing, is to give people what they want to see as fast as possible. But I think you might be missing my point, Bob. My point is, if there is no good news, you're not going to see good news come up.
I got that point too. But I was also thinking that usually when people get up and they want to fire back at their TV or what's on their computer, it's not because they're excited by the positive, it's because they're outraged by what they see as the negatives. I mean, I just think that's the way we're wired, I'm going to write a letter and I'm going to blast that woman or that man for this and that.
Well, I think we all ought to pause and try to take a minute to get riled up when something great happens too.
We should. I just don't think that human nature gets us going quite as fast on the things we agree with as on the things we are outraged by. All right, this is going to be a tough one to follow, folks, but I'm going to try. My POTUS report has to do with the recent decision by the Trump administration, including principally the new administrator of the EPA, a guy named, I think, Andrew Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler's prior work was as a lobbyist for the Murray Coal Company. And Mr. Trump has just done a huge number of things to try and help the coal industry. He's very, very committed to having coal miners go back to work and more coal plants continue in operation. Coal plants are closing all over the United States, including here in New Hampshire and in New England. No question about it. And they're not, and despite the Trump's rhetoric, it's not because of an Obama war on coal. It's because coal has become uncompetitive with other resources, including some solar and wind resources, and especially natural gas, which is historically undercutting coal. And so we're seeing coal plants close, and we're seeing nuclear plants close. And it's not because of anything other than the market forces. But now Trump is proposing, through his EPA guy, a rollback of Obama's Clean Power Plan. Surprise. Anything Obama did, as far as Trump was concerned, regardless of what it was or what benefits it was supposed to have, is bad because it was done by Obama. He's made it a real obsession to undo everything Obama did. Well, I think we have to say one of the good things that Obama did was to implement the Supreme Court decision saying that carbon is a pollution and it should be regulated. And he did that with a Clean Power Plan. Now, what Trump is proposing to do is to roll back regulations that would require coal plants that are going to continue to operate to be retrofitted with scrubbers to cut down on some of the damaging air pollution from these plants.
As was ours in Bow.
As was ours in Bow, which looks like it may be on its last legs anyhow. It's been sold. We don't know what the future of that plant's going to be, other than the owned buyer had to operate it for an additional year after the closure, which is the period we're in now. But that year will be up, in 10 months or something like that. And then we'll see what happens. But the thing that I wanted to say about this is EPA, but when they put in a regulation like this, they have to do a cost-benefit analysis. And they found that the benefits of this rule were in part because it would avoid 1,400 premature U.S. deaths. 1,400 premature deaths. That figure has never been undercut by any of the industry groups or retracted by EPA. That 1,400 premature deaths, which, by the way, is a very low estimate compared with other groups that say it's in the tens of thousands. But leave that be. 1,400 premature deaths is the price for giving another little bit of help to the dying coal industry. And and nobody's talking about this. That this is the first time I can remember we've said, okay, we're willing to have more deaths to help a particular economically stressed and very dirty industry. That's my progress report, but I could see defeat. I think you had a better one.
I think it's a question of substance against flash, and you brought the substance, Bob. And this is something that we have to remember. While all of this circus is going on, and our minds are preoccupied with the daily misbehavior, just poor behavior of the person occupying the White House, there are people getting a lot of things done. There are judges being appointed to lifetime appointments on federal appeals courts. There are judges being appointed to lifetime appointments in federal district courts. There are U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals being sworn in all across the country. And these are going to have an impact on your life, my life, and the lives of people much younger than us going forward for a very long time.
Yeah.
And there's no end in sight unless some things change. And the next opportunity for change in this country is going to come up this November.
November 6th, to be precise.
And we have a primary here in New Hampshire coming up in, 2 weeks? We got to get out there. We've got to pick the right candidates. We've got to get people on board who are going to stand up for us, because we're getting rolled right now.
I think you're absolutely right on that, Mike. And this is, these midterm elections are so important. And every time we say this is a really, really important election, and we're saying it this time.
I know it's getting old. But it does seem, at least in my experience, over the past few election cycles, each one is getting tougher and tougher and tougher as far as the battle engaged and the consequences.
Yeah. This one is just so important, because right now, all the levers of federal power are in the hands of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is in the hands of Donald J. Trump. There is no more independent Republicans that conservatives who are standing up for traditional conservative values and not supporting Donald Trump. That's just been.
I never thought I'd see the day where you're out there calling for conservative Republicans to arise.
I would absolutely call for them to arise. I'm waiting for somebody other than our hero who just departed us and unfortunately badly treated by the president in his passing, Senator John McCain of Arizona. I'm very sorry to say that with him gone, I see no counterforce who was in the Republican Party and the elected officials in the House and particularly in the United States Senate. I see no shining profile in courage, to use the title of John F. Kennedy's book when he was a Harvard graduate student, or Harvard student, Profiles in Courage. I see no profile in courage with the passing of John McCain, and it's really very, very, very sad. And, there's been no investigations of this administration. You don't think there's things to investigate? How about this scandal of helping out the coal industry at the cost of causing many premature deaths of American citizens as a result? How about investigating that? There's so
Bob,
much.
There's actually a memo that was leaked that had been circulating among the Republican national leadership that they've been using with their donors, trying to stress the importance of a Republican victory in this midterm election. And what they basically cataloged a list of some 30 scandals that will be investigated if the Republicans,
Right.
basically taking the position that the Republicans in the House of Representatives and in the Senate right now are protecting the president from investigation of scandals that they acknowledge exist.
Yep.
That's the importance of that memo. You might have seen it in the news come out over the weekend. This memo came out, but the importance of it is, one, an acknowledgement. They know these issues exist. They know they should be investigated and would otherwise be investigated, but for their stonewalling.
Yeah.
And they acknowledge that in this. So it's
Yeah,
it's pretty craven. It's pretty craven.
That's the word for it, craven. And I was astonished to hear none of these committees, none of these cognizant congressional oversight committees, and that's one of the biggest jobs Congress has, is oversight of the executive branch, to make sure that it's doing what the law requires, to be sure that people are being treated in accordance with the law. Not one subpoena has been issued as a result of any of these outrages, whether it was the firing of the director of the FBI, and now the attempt to force out Attorney General Sessions. And
Now, that's not going to happen until after the election.
Well,
I think they're
I'm
going to
not-
trick all you Republican voters out there. Well, actually, you probably don't care. You probably want Sessions out, but you unaligned voters. If they're going to keep Sessions, but don't be fooled by this. As soon as the election's over, one way or the other, I think, regardless of how it comes out, I think that Sessions is gone within days after the results of the midterm elections.
There's the ethical lapses in this administration. The things that Scott Pruitt at EPA did before he was finally forced out after Fox News commentators finally said, "Mr. President, you promised to drain the swamp." Scott Pruitt is the swamp. With that, because it was on Fox News, Trump finally did ask for Pruitt's resignation. And what do we get in his place? A coal industry lobbyist that's now implementing the thing I talked about in my version of the progress report.
Careful
my
what
chapter.
you wish for might come true. You know,
that's right.
It can get worse, folks. It can get worse.
Yeah.
And many say that it is getting worse.
Yeah, it is. This is impunity like we've never seen.
Bob, you talk about ethical lapses and all of this. I think it gets even more basic, and it becomes a question of manners. What really shocks and appalls me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I was raised, I may not be a gentleman, but I can try to be a gentleman. Mm-hmm. And that's how I was raised, that you always strive to be better than you actually are, and and to try to grow in the course of your life. And we don't even see this. There's not even any kind of effort to be a decent person. It's pettiness, it's vindictiveness, it's personal animus. It's really it's something that I'm just not accustomed to seeing in public life. You know it exists, but you think it exists, in the dark, in the shadows, in the streets. You don't think it exists in higher society and in public life.
Okay, well, I guess we're up against the time when we take our first break, and we will do that now. Again, we'd love to have some participation from our viewers out there. 640-3091 if you'd like to opine or question us on these topics or others. And we will move on. We're not going to talk the whole time about the dismay that the Trump administration is causing so many of us and so many of our friends around the world. But we may have more to say on some of these subjects, but we will move on. And I hope that Donna Soucy, those of you who were expecting her from my Facebook post, I hope she will be here before we get to the second break. And if she is, we'll move her right in and chat with her. So we'll be right back. Okay, we understand we had a caller who may not be on the line now, but if he calls back, he will be welcomed. I wanted to move on to something else at the state level. When we get to the ballot box in November 6th, not only will we be voting for all state officers and all federal officers except our two U.S. senators, neither on the ballot this time, there will be two constitutional amendments for folks to vote on. And I'm particularly concerned with and hopeful for the first of these two constitutional amendments, Constitutional Amendment 1. This constitutional amendment will restore taxpayer standing to the citizens of New Hampshire, something that we generally had recognized by our courts, including our state Supreme Court, for 150 years, until in 2014 the Supreme Court issued a decision in a very important case involving now member of the Board of Education, Bill Duncan, that no taxpayer could could sue to challenge the diversion of public funds to private schools, including religious schools. Now, this decision followed a Superior Court decision which ruled in favor of Mr. Duncan, who sued in his capacity as a taxpayer. And his argument was, I think this is unconstitutional under the New Hampshire Constitution, which is very definitive about separation of church and state, more so than the federal Constitution. And he was there, and it was up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, nope, we don't want to hear your case. We don't want to hear your case. Now, that's one reason why the Democrats are very upset. Democrats, I think, along with some Republicans, do not like the idea of diverting public monies to private schools by vouchers or tax credits or any other mechanism. But, you know, if a taxpayer doesn't have standing to sue to challenge that, who does? Pretty hard to figure out who would be a person with standing. And then we had the situation in Manchester where there was a teacher contract up for approval by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And a couple of our aldermen at the time had family members, immediate family members, who were employed by the school district. They were advised by our city solicitor that that under the city charter they should deem themselves conflicted and not vote. And they did vote, and that their votes made it possible to get the necessary majority to pass into law the contract. Now, that one got the Republicans real upset, as you might imagine.
Direct benefit, indirect benefit.
Direct benefit, indirect benefit. And somebody brought a suit in Superior Court, said they violated their oath of office, they violated the city charter of Manchester when these two particular aldermen voted for this. And the court shook its head and said, I'm sorry to say, but the Supreme Court said, taxpayers don't have any standing, you can't bring that suit. Well, when the Supreme Court makes a decision like this and based it on the Constitution, which they did. They didn't say there was no statute authorizing it, because they said that earlier, and then we passed a statute that did authorize it. So in order to end taxpayer standing this time, they had to reach back and say, well, we now declare this to be unconstitutional. And there's only one remedy for that. When the Supreme Court says something is unconstitutional, and this is the New Hampshire Constitution, the only remedy for that is a constitutional amendment. Now, these amendments have to get a 3/5 vote in both houses of the legislature. This particular constitutional amendment, Constitutional Amendment 1, passed the House 309 to 9. 309 to 9. Overwhelming vote. In the Senate, it was 22 to 2. Another overwhelming vote. It was not close. It way exceeded the 3/5 requirement. It was, 90%. So the only remaining thing to make this thing law and to undo the Supreme Court's decision and restore the right of New Hampshire taxpayers, and some of you out there, certainly New Hampshire taxpayers, have the right to challenge the government when you think the government is acting illegally in its disbursement of your money, whether it's, at the municipal level over the teacher's contract or at the state level over diversion of private funds to public schools. Now, we have just formed a small PAC to try and educate voters about this, because I think this will pass handily if voters understand the issue.
Yeah, see, Bob, I think it's there's going to have to be an education campaign.
This is the
there's
education.
Two reasons. One, taxpayer standing, blah, 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 blah. And then the other thing is the word tax is in the referendum question, and people are going to say tax, I don't like it, and they're going to vote against it. So I don't
think the word tax is in the referendum question.
Taxpayer standing?
Oh, taxpayer standing, okay.
That's, people see tax and they run from that. So I think that you do have to educate folks, and I think we should start that process right here.
We're going to.
What is standing, Bob?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people don't know what that's. You're standing on the corner watching all the girls go by, like the song.
Yeah.
Well, that's one form of standing. But standing means that you are entitled to bring a suit.
So if someone hits me with their car, I have standing to sue them.
Right.
But if they don't hit me with their car, I don't have standing to sue them.
That's right. If they heard about it because it was a TV report, they don't have standing to sue and try and get money. You probably got the injury and should get the money. But in a case like this, going back to the Duncan case, where I'd argue that the entire population of New Hampshire was affected because this is a constitutional change to a right we've all had as citizens in this state for a long time. So we have a PAC. It's called Yes on One. It's a small PAC. It will be simply doing educational work on this. It's very bipartisan. It's supported by yours truly, Bill Duncan, of course, and also by Chuck Douglas, a former Supreme Court Justice and a former congressman from the 2nd District, and a very prominent attorney, and the Granite State taxpayers. The League of Women Voters is not going to take a position on this per se because their charter doesn't let them, but they will be doing educational materials to buttress what we're doing. And I just got the draft palm card, which we're going to be handing out, which is right here. I know you can't see it, but it has a picture of the state Supreme Court, and I like it. It says, "How do you right a wrong if you can't take them to court?" Quote, "The public has a right to orderly, lawful, accountable government." Unquote. What can you do if they find a government action to be improper? Amend our Constitution to restore a 150-year-old New Hampshire right to take them to court. November 6th, vote yes on question 1. And there we go. We only need 2/3 of the voters who come to the polls. Doesn't have to be 2/3 of all voters, but 2/3 of the voters should.
Only 2/3. Wow, that's a steep hill to climb.
It's a steep hill to
You
climb.
got to get in these days where elections are 49-49. I
Well,
understand that this cuts both ways and that this has an appeal for both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, it does.
And it really should have an appeal to anybody who wants good government.
Yes. And we're going to be working hard to get people to understand that this is a real important thing. The argument against it is, you can probably figure it out, oh, this will lead to a flood of frivolous lawsuits. Well, we've had it for 150 years, and it never did happen. And since the Supreme Court decided this decision, there's only really been three attempts to right a perceived wrong that were dismissed because of lack of standing. The Manchester case I mentioned, the Duncan case I mentioned, and then there was the more recent case up in Dunbarton where there was a large surplus in the town's accounts that had been missed because of an accounting error. And the question was, what's going to happen to that surplus? Can the government keep it and maybe improve the school, or I guess the school, or should it go back to the taxpayers? And there was a lawsuit over that. And the lawsuit found that the should go back to the taxpayers, but found that there was no standing, but decided on another basis that the suit had been brought on the ground, the decision had been made on the grounds there was an emergency. The court found no emergency. So those are the only 3 cases. So there is not a flood of frivolous lawsuits. Plus, as Mike and I both well know, the courts are well armed to protect against frivolous lawsuits. There are court rules that have sanctions for frivolous lawsuits, and frivolous lawsuits, they're not common, and they're particularly not common if you're using a lawyer, because lawyers don't like frivolous lawsuits, because guess what? They don't pay. They don't pay. So it's hard to get a lawyer to take a frivolous lawsuit.
How candid of you, Bob.
So
refreshing candor from an attorney in Manchester.
Well, a retired attorney, yes. So there's one thing I very much wanted to talk about today, and by the way, just to complete the story, there is a Constitutional Amendment 2. It's a privacy-related constitutional amendment. That one only passed the House with 1 vote to spare and the Senate with 1 vote to spare. Again, the requirement is 3/5 vote of the both bodies. So that one is going to have a much tougher sledding than this one, I would suspect. And it's, I think, more controversial. I think once people understand all we're trying to do is give our citizens in this state, where we like the citizens to have a lot of say about the way things go with all our elections and our same-day registration and our town meetings and all of these things, we want our citizens to have back one of the most key rights they have, the key to the courthouse door, so they can at least have a claim presented. Doesn't mean the claim's going to win. They may lose, but have a right to have that case argued and presented before a judge, or in some cases a judge and a jury. So I'll be sure we'll be talking more about this as we get close to the November 6th.
I see what you did there, Bob. By diminishing the second constitutional amendment, you elevated the importance. You can vote against that other one, but vote for this one. And I do see what you did there.
I won't cry for the second. And I'm worried.
But could you tell us a little bit more about the second privacy amendment?
Well, it's the privacy hawk we have in the House is Neil Kirk, who's been the chairman of finance for a long time, very important position.
I think.
And he's not running this time. He may be back, but he's not running this time. And he is a real privacy hawk, and he has been pushing this. But I'm not really equipped to talk that much about it, except that I share a concern you were adverting to here, Mike, that I'm worried that the Second Amendment may have woes that will affect the vote on the First Amendment. So I want to make sure they get carefully.
Keep it clean. Let's
keep it clean.
Up number 1.
I wish there was only 1 amendment on the ballot, but there are 2.
Well, we have a caller, Bob.
Okay.
We always like it when the callers call in.
Hi there.
Good evening. Welcome to the Progress Report. You're live on the air.
Yeah. Somebody's got to explain something to me about the Democratic Party, which I'm totally confused. We have a candidate running for Congress who just moved here last summer. She lived in Illinois, and then she was working in Washington, D.C., and then she went to Illinois and decided, well, she couldn't run there, so she decided to come here. The woman is getting 90% funding from outstate people to run for Congress. The woman claimed to be a Marine Corps, whatever she is, and everything else, Maura Sullivan. How can the Democratic Party allow a person to come into this state and carpet? I would consider that as a carpetbagger. She moved to Portland. She's going to buy a home and everything else, but only 10% of the people in the state are funding her, and she comes here and claims to be in the interest of the state of New Hampshire. Now, give me a freaking break. The woman worked in Washington. She went to Illinois, and she was going to run there, and she decided not to because she knows she wasn't going to get elected, so she comes to New Hampshire. This state is loaded with carpetbaggers going back to Sununu, who was from Cuba, even Shaheen, and all these other candidates, Scott Brown, Romney, everybody else. How can the Democratic Party allow this person to run for a political office? She only lived here last summer.
Okay.
Can you explain that to me, please?
We'll jump off of that question. That's an excellent question, and I got to tell you, I have been dying to talk about that issue for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and we've been waiting for this candidate to come on the show. There's been an open and consistent invitation.
We've reached out to her campaign. She's the only one of the candidates, other than some of them are really, not even really campaigning, a couple of them. But other than that, we've had every candidate on who has some credibility as a candidate on this show running for that first district seat, and she has not deigned to respond to us. So I'm sorry she didn't. We'd like to ask her that question ourselves right here. But I think I can tell you that the bottom line is the Democratic Party doesn't pick the candidates. The candidates choose to run either as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or something else.
Yeah.
And we try to be, as a Democratic Party, we try to be open to all. But I share your concerns. And now I'm happy to say the very hardworking, very busy Donna Soucy has been able to join us, and we are so pleased that she did. I hope you didn't have too madcap a trip down from the north part of the state.
No, not at all. Drove carefully.
We're really, really, really glad you're here.
I'm glad you could make it.
And
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Bob.
And let's see, Donna. I wanted to. There's so much I want to cover with you, and we won't have a lot of time. And
I'll talk fast.
Okay. I just would like to say that Donna Soucy, as I mentioned, has now been promoted to Minority Leader of the Senate Democrats, and well-deserved, because I don't think anybody works harder being a senator or being a candidate. If the book on how to run a campaign is ever written for New Hampshire specifically, Donna Soucy should be the author. She is a relentless campaigner. She's knocking on doors. She's writing notes to people. She's doing everything a candidate. Having events, she just does everything. So she will be seeking re-election to her seat representing the southern part of the city of Manchester and the town of Litchfield. And this will, if you get elected, this will be what, 3?
Fourth term.
Fourth term.
I've served 3 already, and
me too. So there we are. That's really great. But I thought, Don, if it's okay with you, I know that you. And this kind of goes to what this caller was talking about in an indirect way. You were with our chairman, Ray Buckley, out in Chicago, is it?
I want to talk about this.
And we had a major change in the rules of the Democratic Party for the presidential race, and I guess also things that pertain to New Hampshire and our highly prized and I think well-deserved role as the first of the nation primary. And I'd like to get your kind of take on that, if you're willing to talk about it.
Sure. So the Democratic National Committee was meeting out in Chicago. The Rules and Bylaws Committee of the Democratic Party had been meeting for many, many months. As you might recall, there were some concerns raised about how delegates, particularly the elected officials, got to select candidates and how their
superdelegates.
votes.
This is what they call the
Superdelegates.
superdelegates.
They call them superdelegates. They tend to be elected officials or certain party officials.
And by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to remind our viewers and Bob that
Yeah.
Ray Buckley came on the show several years ago and talked about the reasoning behind the superdelegates to open up the field for more rank and file folks to come in as delegates, as pledged delegates. So we understand that this wasn't.
It was considered to be a
it was
reform
good
in its
intent,
day.
yes.
In its day.
Yes, it was certainly good intent so that someone who had a lot of name recognition wouldn't necessarily run at a caucus level, but people who were volunteers and, really active campaigners for a particular candidate would have an opportunity to go to the convention to represent that candidate. So a number of meetings were held, different proposals were offered, and I'm very happy to say that at this meeting, the report with several changes to the rules was adopted by a supermajority of those present, including our National Committee woman Kathy Sullivan from Manchester and Bill Shaheen from Madbury. And essentially what the report does, couple things. One, it preserves our first-in-the-nation status, the New Hampshire primary, but two, it reformed how the delegate process will be done so that delegates, the so-called superdelegates, governors, senators, congresspeople, and other party officials, will no longer be able to vote on the first ballot. They may support a candidate, but their vote is not part of the initial vote cast to put a particular candidate over the top at the party convention.
And historically, it's been a long, long time since there was a second ballot.
Correct.
I don't know how long it goes back. but
Correct.
a
So the
long
only
way.
opportunity they would have to vote for a specific candidate at the convention and be part of selecting the nominee would be in the instance where there's a second ballot.
From my way of thinking, I think it's an improvement to the policy, but I do want to say, as full-throatedly as I can, I am so grateful to the New Hampshire Democratic Party for supporting this, because they didn't have to, but they did. And I think it was very important that they did, and I think it'll go a long way towards strengthening the New Hampshire Democratic Party and growing the New Hampshire Democratic Party, because it was a particular issue here with our first-in-the-nation primary. So I'm very happy that the result came out the way it did, and the way that the party leaders handled it. I'm very happy for that.
Thank you. And I completely agree. I was glad that they supported reforms, and I will tell you there were actually some hearings held in New Hampshire. And some of the Rules and Bylaws Committee members from out of state were invited to attend to hear what the concerns really were. And I think a lot of those comments were taken back and were part of the many proposals that they worked through and ultimately came up with this one to try to reform the process and make it, once again, more democratic. There were also some other suggestions made with respect to caucuses, encouraging caucus states to have an absentee ballot process and to go from being caucuses to primaries, much like Maine has just done, trying to open, once again, the process to engage more people in that process and in that selection.
I think the party can only benefit from that type of thinking, and and I hope that politics ain't beanbag. It's going to take a while to get this all firing, in sync. But I'm very happy that we're moving in that direction, because prior to this time, as I'm sure you know, there was some concern right here in our ballpark about some conflict, and I'm really hoping that goes away and that we can all pull on the oar in the same direction in the next couple of months.
I guess just one other thing on this. I came across this thing. This is something written in June, and I don't know whether the rules as proposed were enacted. It says, listen now, DNC proposes new loyalty oath to burn independence. The new rule gives DNC sweeping powers and control over the primary process, and then they say what they call as a loyalty oath has to be taken. And I think all that really says is you have to say that you are in fact a Democrat. But some people take that as a kind of a loyalty oath and say, so is there anything, did any of that get into the rules as adopted?
Gee, I'm not familiar with that part, Bob. I really can't speak to it.
Okay, I don't know. As I say, this is just happened to be something I picked off the internet. It goes back to June, so I don't know whether there's anything here to deal with on this at this point. You want to take a quick break?
Well, probably a good point to transition. We can come back and we
We'll
can
come back
spend
and we'll let Donna talk
100%
about her campaign
on
and
the
her
campaign, yeah.
accomplishments, which are many.
Take a very quick break.
So we're back. This is our third and therefore our final segment of the progress report for this, the final Wednesday in August, and a steamy hot day it is. But be careful what you wish for. It won't be too many months where you're saying, where are those nice warm days we had in August? Anyway, we are very glad that Donna Soucy has been able to join us after a long day of doing some of the things she does, this time way up in the North Country in Berlin. And Donna, I know you've got a lot of things you've accomplished in many areas, but particularly as a state senator, why don't you remind us of some of the things you've done that you're particularly proud of? And I know some of them, but tell our people.
Sure. So there were a couple pieces of legislation that were pretty significant. I think one of the most significant pieces of legislation was a bill that ended up being called Joshua's Law. Many of you might remember Joshua Savion was killed by his own father here in Manchester at the YWCA. And that led to, and every time I say this, even now, people are surprised, but up until that point, New Hampshire did not have a crime of domestic violence. People who committed acts of domestic violence were charged with strangulation or with assault or what have you. But we never actually classified the relationship between the victim and their assailant until the passage of this law. And what it has allowed us to do is to not only better provide for services for victims, but also for repeat offenders, for bail. Just so many statistics that we've been able...
Tracking the crime independently.
Exactly. And we knew before then, but now we know even more certainly, that the likelihood of somebody offending again is accelerated if they're committing crimes against. And we define the relationship several different ways. It can be parent-child. It can also be obviously partners. But we know that the likelihood of someone reoffending is fairly significant, so we can take better precautions in cases like that, affording due process to both parties in these cases. And that really, I think, has made a significant difference and continues to make a difference in the lives of people here in New Hampshire. I was also sponsor of a law to create buffer zones around reproductive health care facilities so that they can be demarcated so that people can access them safely and have a safe passage. Sponsored a law to...
Again, I just want to go back to that one, reaching a compromise that protected the rights of the people who wanted to go to these clinics as well as the rights of the people who have every right to protest, but keeping them apart so that they don't interfere with each other.
Absolutely, and the New Hampshire language is definitely a compromise. There was, the Massachusetts law was actually overturned by the United States Supreme Court. Massachusetts had a fixed border where the buffer would start, and what we did in New Hampshire was to say, up to the sidewalk, up to, so that you had a clear path that was delineated, but you weren't infringing on the public property and the rights of those that wanted to protest or to
Now,
march and tell
has
their
that
stories.
statute been subject to judicial review yet? Is there court
There
opinion
was
on that?
there was a case brought. We had not at that point had anyone actually post boundaries, so the case was not ripe at that point. We may see litigation again, but as I said, we were very careful in crafting that law to make sure that we were as limiting as possible so that we were not infringing on someone else's rights.
And one of the points that I wanted to make is that as a legislator, you're always looking for the way to get the job done, not the way to win the battle. And I think that's very
That's
important.
well put. That's exactly right.
Well,
And I've seen that you've been my senator for 3 terms, and I've watched what you've done before on other, as an alderman, you ran for mayor. And it's been very consistent with you. Getting the job done is much more important than winning a battle, or I think even more significantly, getting a lot of credit maybe,
well,
as long as the job gets done.
I think, if you're really doing the job for your constituents, really trying to advance policies that matter, it's really not about who gets the credit, but who actually can get something done. And how you do that is by building coalitions. And, if you're in the minority party, I could have all the Democratic votes, but I'm not going to get something done unless I'm able to reach across the aisle. And as you said, in some instances, compromise. And, oftentimes listening to people that have a very different point of view really helps you craft better legislation.
But you work with those people, not against those people. That's the thing. That's
You have
the thing
to.
I'm
You have
trying
to
to
be
make.
willing to
You
listen.
work with your opponents, not against them. I've never seen you as a confrontational kind of legislature where you're out to be against something. You're always working towards something.
Well, thank you.
We'll leave that-
Appreciate
that.
that.
Well, let's just take a look in our crystal ball. How do you think? How do you feel about the upcoming elections for yourself, the Senate Democrats, and Democrats in New Hampshire generally?
I'm feeling very confident about a number of our candidates, number of Democratic candidates in the state Senate. As you know, currently the makeup of the 24-member body is 10 Democrats and 14 Republicans. I really see great potential for that switching this time around. We have some really dynamic, hardworking, and exciting candidates in various districts that I think are going to make.
And a lot of young
Make
people,
for a
young people
change.
working on these campaigns that are really, really exciting themselves, I think. I think
My
it's
first term, I was the youngest member of the Senate. That didn't last very long. There are a lot of up-and-coming candidates that I think may get elected this time, and I'm going to be somewhere in the middle at this rate, but that's fine. Looking forward to working with some great new people.
Do you think we can hold that seat up in the District 1 in the North Country, given the news about this?
The news about Senator Woodburn was very unfortunate. There is a candidate, a woman named Kathleen Kelly, not the Kathleen Kelly that many of us know who's been a candidate here in Manchester, but she is waging a write-in campaign. And there is a Republican candidate as well. As I've said, there are 2 things that are going to settle this issue. The court case will be handled by the judiciary, and the election will be handled by the voters of the North Country. They're going to have to make a decision when they go to the ballot box. Senator Woodburn had filed for re-election, and as a result is on the ballot. The only way a candidate in New Hampshire is removed from the ballot is if they pass away or if they move out of their district. I don't see either of those circumstances occurring here, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that seat. But as I said, there are a number of other really exciting candidates running very, very good campaigns. Jen Alford Teaster in District 8 and Dr. Tom Sherman, District 24 on the Seacoast
Very
area.
fine candidate. I know him, of course.
Shannon Chandley, who's one of your colleagues in the House, who's running in the Amherst, Merrimack
And,
area.
Bill Morgan down in the
John Morgan,
John
in the
Morgan, I'm
Exeter,
sorry,
Brentwood area. Yeah, so a lot of
lot of
like I
good
said,
people.
very, very competent and hardworking candidates that I think would represent their districts very well, and I'm very hopeful for many of them.
Are you campaigning for these other folks as well as yourself?
As the the leader, but before that I was the caucus chair. I certainly keep in touch with a lot of the candidates. I have done some events with them. You mentioned door-to-door before. As you know, I do a lot of door-to-door. And part of the reason I'm able to do it, fortunately, is that geographically my district is very small. So wards 5 through 9 in the town of Litchfield, the houses are close
doable.
enough that it's doable.
I've
I can
seen
do
you
more than
I've-
3,000
I've seen
doors.
you go door to door. You're a master of it. You make friends every time you do it. So keep it up. And it works in New Hampshire. It works.
It really, really is, I think, the most effective way to campaign. So I've done a little bit of that with some of my colleagues, but I have to tell you, the best part of the campaign, I mean, you spend a lot of time on the phone raising money and doing events and that part of it, but going door to door, as much as I try to prepare before to answer questions about the specific issues that I think that my constituents or that the people in the neighborhoods are going to raise, I always learn new things, and it's what I value most about the campaign, because going to Concord, you're insulated under that building. I mean, what you hear under that dome, it is not always as in tune as what people in the neighborhoods are really thinking about. So getting out there and actually talking to people as they're getting home from work or they're preparing dinner. People are very open to it. People appreciate it, and
they're looking. They've got a lot to say too. I think at least this season, it seems folks want to engage.
They really do.
There's a pent up desire to have these conversations that I haven't seen in past cycles.
There are a lot of strong feelings on both sides, and a lot of interesting dinner table conversations that are going on that probably wouldn't have a couple years ago. But this current political climate, as you said, Mike, I think has really engaged a lot more people in the process. So I'm really hopeful that for the primary on September 11th that we have a huge showing. You were talking earlier about the congressional race, which 11 candidates running for one seat to succeed Carol Shea Porter. That's huge on the Democratic side.
It's actually very exciting. We have been fortunate enough here to have all except the one of the major candidates, and every one of them brings a great toolbox to the table. I'm mixing my metaphor a little bit, but we've got a great slate of candidates. I'm already supporting Chris, and I've made that clear. But boy, he's got some competition. I'm glad to see he's out running hard.
We should point out tomorrow evening, the New Hampshire Democratic Party is hosting a candidate forum with all of the first congressional candidates at the Manchester Community College,
What
Ward
time is
12, and it's at 6:30 p.m. The doors open at 6. So if anyone wants to hear from the candidates, ask questions, they get to submit written questions as well. That would be a great opportunity for anyone that's still undecided in the primary.
And how do you feel about the Democratic candidates for governor? Have you made a choice for yourself, and do you think we got a chance of having Kristen will be a one-term governor?
Well, I certainly think it's a possibility. We have two great candidates. I probably will be making an endorsement very soon, before the primary. And I do think there have been a number of things, we were discussing this last night here, that the governor has sort of come up short on. I mean, we talked about the two bills that he vetoed, the energy bills. Those
Which
are going
we'll
to have
be dealing with on September 13th.
Yes, those have significant impact. He cited some concerns about costs, but the job loss by the veto of those two bills is pretty significant, and I think a pretty big
That's
economic
one of
factor.
them being the biomass bill.
And the net metering.
And then net metering bill,
yeah.
which is very important to many municipalities in New Hampshire, including Manchester, because we have that landfill site which is well capable of supporting more solar than the current cap limit for net metering.
We need a little push to get that thing developed.
We need a
We're
little push to
We're not
get
going in
that
the right
developed.
direction yet.
We've
where we
attempted it
stand
a
right
couple
now.
times, and
Yeah.
it's come up short.
Yeah, and the net
which is
metering, I think,
unfortunate.
is the thing that can really make it work, because it makes it much more attractive to you. The solar, I think, is a good idea anyhow, but this makes it much more attractive and more financially worthwhile for the city to do it. And I certainly hope that we move forward to that. We want to support our renewable energy goals, too, here in New Hampshire. We're way behind some other states around the country, and particularly in the region, in our commitment to energy efficiency and renewable energy, our achievement in those fields, as well as our commitment.
As you like to
So-
say, the savings is due to conserving energy.
That's right. The best, cheapest energy is the energy you don't have to buy to get the job done. The negawatts, not the megawatts, the negawatts. We got to have more negawatts, and we can do that. Well, I think we've come to the end of the hour. They always go by fast. I'm so
Sure
glad
do.
after a long day of hard work you were able to join us for the time we had.